We'll now move on to our next panel speaker, Laurent Schmid. Laurent is Vice President for Strategy and Innovation, Grid Power Electronics and Automation of the Alstom grid in France. And his talk is entitled Impact of New Prosumer Connectivity on Grid and ICT Architectures. Laurent, you have the floor. Maybe you want to use both?
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be here. We are a long-term partner of the IEEE conference, and we are sourcing a lot of our innovation through this ecosystem. And we are, of course, long-term partners into doing keynotes. I was, for instance, early this year into Mumbai for doing a speech on smart cities, and hopefully we're going to continue in that direction in the next few years. A few words about what we see happening on the market right now. We really see that, as what was introduced previously, a radical change and acceleration in terms of innovation across the entire energy system. You see on that slide what are the new topics which have been dealt through on the past 30 years. And we've seen introduction of renewable 5 years ago, introduction of demand response 3 years ago, mostly from the US. And I think one of the key topics now is how to connect the grid with the cities to make the city smarter, and especially the citizen part of the city. So my speech today is going to be around how can we bring in better interaction between the consumer, producer, prosumer, with the IT of the energy system. So the way we see the future of the grid to evolve is really towards decentralization, but not an anarchic decentralization, but more a coordinated decentralization, if I may say, with a maintained role for transmission grids and power plants, but really a new revolution at the level of the consumer, where we see emergence of new concepts, which will allow to kind of transact energy peer-to-peer between consumer at the distribution grid level, but still maintain consistency with what's getting dispatched on the main wholesale market system. So it's all about thinking on prosumer integration, how to better coordinate grid control from AC and DC. We see HVDC becoming a very strong element of power flow controls in the future, especially in Europe, but also changing the way we control distribution into facilitating the market for distributed energy resources, and further expansion of digitalization of substation. So really what is new is this concept of distributed energy resource, which I'm sure most of you know, which is really a resource which is very low into the hierarchy of the network, so typically at the level which is not really controlled. So this is mostly behind the meter, renewable, various kind of EVs, PHEV, or distributed storage, and here the challenge is how to control it. And I think we've been implied into several projects with a fundamental term emerging now called transactive control, which is absolutely fundamental in the sense that the question is how is the grid operator going to allow control on a resource which is not owned by himself, but behind the meter. So either through a price or through a specific contract, he will negotiate with that distributed energy resource. What we also see, of course, as part of that transactive control is the fact that there is an actual end user's prosumer who has to arbitrate in various ways to the way he consumes and uses energy. He may want to arbitrate against his CO2 footprint in the future, against his demand response strategy, arbitrating across gas, heat, electricity, also arbitrating against transportation. I'm driving an EV every day, and I'm keeping thinking whether I should use the public or the EV transportation, but also combining it with a set of IT services. And that's what we really see as the future of the prosumers. And how can this prosumer interact with the energy system is really an important element. So what we see, and we tried, and we are participating to various demonstration projects while we speak. We have around 25 of them in the world. We really see one element which is growing very fast is the notion of community energy management. And I think we learned that as among these projects as one of the community which we applied it to ourselves, which is the Alstom community, when we wanted to do energy efficiency around our factories. And we wanted to build this around one of our hydro factory in Grenoble, where we try to think how can we get users of our factories and consumers interested by the energy topic. And so we had a lot of thinking how to share the benefit with our employee, how to reinvest some of these benefits into several communities, into the direction to what we were educating our employees for. And actually it did work very well. So what we learned through that experience is energy is not a matter, consumer is not a matter of controlling it, it's a matter of educating it and making and putting technology for allowing consumer to benchmark each other, to speak about why are they making these efforts. And I think these are a few examples of, and that was not a major community in terms of number of people, but we were amazed to see how the power of community was suddenly raising a lot of interest with our employee being at work and then being at home. And so from the effort in our factories, we then decided to roll out, I would say, devices into the home of our own employees so that they can really benchmark themselves not only into their factory, but into their real life. And this ended up into an energy challenge, which we benchmark teams. And I think that's personally, that's the future of our industry, is how are we going to make sure consumers get aware of the value which they bring to the system into an environment which is not as complex as what we know as an engineer. Everyone cannot turn into a dispatcher. So in a nutshell, the way we see a grid system to evolve is really this notion of microgrid and distribution grid node balancing. That does not mean that the transmission does not have a role to play, but that means the complexity of coordinated transmission and distribution is growing. And with a new role at the distribution network level into being able to balance that grid nodes in coordination with wholesale prices. And of course, new system approach into cities, and where we see cities starting to step up into the dialogue and wanted to understand and know better so that they can animate their own community. And we are amazed to see the number of cities which come to us now and trying to initiate, I would say, energy efficiency communities through very similar process. I want to talk a few minutes about not only our own effort internally, but what we have developed with the French distribution grid operator ERDF, which end up being a very similar, I would say, outcome. So we thought about how to create that better coordination of distributed energy resource at the level of an area of a city in France called Nice, in the south of France. The project is called Nice Grid. And we ended up actually designing a system which is a mini marketplace to be able to coordinate distributed energy resources at the distribution level in coordination with the TSO and the transmission RTE. So that's really mirrored a new type of environment. So this ends up creating a micro communities and microgrids around several substations. And we have now around 600 end users playing and arbitrating themselves within that community, making sure that they consume while their neighbor PV produce, and they consume to the benefit of the rest of the distribution systems. So I have a few slides expressing how this is being materialized. To the opposite to what we were thinking before, we thought that we would bring a lot of SCADA and so on to do that. It's not the case. It ends up being a market system to coordinate transaction around the grid nodes and in coordination with the flow-based calculation, potentially, which is run by the TSO. So we really expand the concept of energy market down to the end users. And that does not mean going against the structure at the TSO and wholesale with aggregators and so on, but bringing a bit more complexity in the way the aggregator interacts with his end users and bring flexibility to the end user in coordination to constraints into the TSO and DSO network. So this market, small market, ends up coordinating various types of resources, which are storage units of various sites at the grid node areas, as well as demand response and smart homes. And this gives a view of what we see emerging on the distribution level is a view of the entire grid down to the smart meter and low voltage. So what is absolutely clear is the time we start really interacting with consumer through a market and into trying to value congestion and constrain capacity on the end user side, the distribution grid operator needs to have a clearer view of what happens on these grid nodes, hence potentially down to the smart meters. Few pictures here just to show that we are not in a test lab or in a theoretical environment. You see on the top hand here the 1 megawatt storage, which is now connected to the HV-MV substation and operating, ready to operate now into the auxiliary service market of RTE. You see on the right one is the mid-size storage, which is installed on the post office, which is playing around in the community around. So in that community, you don't have only prosumers of residential, but also commercial industrial. So here you have a post office. And you see here a few residential people now installing residential battery into their homes and showing how they are going to use it in coordination with demand response into their home. So that's really show, I think it's a very interesting way forward to think how the role of the TSOs and DSO going to evolve in the future. So in a nutshell, we really see the distribution company evolving its roles into becoming a form of a market facilitator. So the world is no more to talk about SCADA into the distribution, but really building another new layer on the top of a SCADA to facilitate that market. And being able to do this in coordination with the TSO, it's absolutely fundamental that we do not disturb the rest of the market. So of course, the best energy has to be transacted in an optimal way, whether it's producing locally or centrally through the TSO and wholesale market system. So in conclusion, I would say we see the future of these systems to evolve in terms of IT into becoming much more complex in exchanging, sharing data across TSO, DSOs, and cities. So we really see, on one hand, I would say, a more integration of, I would say an expansion of wholesale market mechanism down to the distribution level. I would say taking into account constraints on transmission and distribution. So flow-based markets are obviously essential on the transmission level. We think they need to be pushed further from day-ahead to intraday as well. But that means also sharing more data to the community and the city level so that the community become, I would say, play his own role into animating the community around it. And I would say what we see as best practice is now cities animating communities around their own buildings, public buildings, expanding to some of their residential habitants and so on, and creating and supporting the utility, whether aggregator, transmission or distribution grid operator, to educate prosumer into that very important element of getting prosumer understanding why they make that effort. So in conclusion, we are really, I think, at the beginning of a new organization of our system. I think it's a really cool environment to be in when I'm listening to our young people. What I want also to say, we don't need to think that it's going to be resolved in 10, 15 years' time. This is now on ground, tested in several countries. I could name also a few examples in the US. We do a lot of work with PGM and PICO in Philadelphia area as an example. And it is close to being ready for deployment. So I think what is very important is that the regulator takes into account all that innovation which is ready to be deployed now and puts, I would say, the right incentive for TSOs and DSOs to move to a next generation investment into that space. And the next generation investment is being able to connect this wonderful electrical vehicle with the balancing of solar PV, wind on a real-time basis. Thank you very much.